Hey everybody, it's Piper here. This is Watercolors for Teens, and we have a 6-week program. The new videos will be posted on Friday at 9 a.m. at the website, and we'll go over different techniques every week, and we'll have different projects to try out. And there's also an art contest I wanted you guys to see. This information is in your bag. There are different age levels and their prizes. Check it out, guys. So if you want to get in touch with me, I'd love to hear your ideas. I'd love to see your artwork. If you're struggling with anything, let me know. You can reach me at piper@rivertreearts.org, and I'll put my address right there. And let's see what else. Oh, so during the videos, if you need a little bit more time, or you need to stop for a minute, you can always put these on pause. That's the beauty of videos, is being able to pause things. So keep that in mind as you're working, and enjoy. All right, I'll see you there. Bye-bye. Hey everybody, let's get started. So I wanted to go over our setup for watercolor painting. I have 2 waters here. I use one for rinsing out brushes when I have a dirty brush that I need to get the paint out of, and one for mixing up colors. So that stays clean, and this one can be dirty. Now sometimes I forget, doesn't matter. Anyway, that's the idea. Before we begin, I wet down all my paints so that they're ready to paint with. They'll be really dry because they're brand new and they've never been used, and they're just going to be dry. So I'm going to put at least a drop of water on each one of these with my large brush that was included in your art bag. And today's project is going to be a galaxy sky, and we're going to learn a wet into wet technique and a splatter technique in this. And this is very loose. It doesn't require any drawing skills. We're just going to play. But I wanted to focus in on wet onto wet technique. And a few things that I wanted to talk about was brush care. So when you're dipping your brush in the water, don't dip it in the water over the ferrule. And the ferrule is this metal piece that holds the bristles to the handle. So if you keep going over the ferrule into the water, eventually the wooden handle will swell up and it will get loose as it dries out. And then I'm sure you've all worked with a wobbly brush on occasion, and I tape them up and keep going with them. But it's nicer if you don't have to tape it. So just make sure not to have your water level go up over the top of this metal part. Okay, and I have a paper towel here for drying my paintbrush, or possibly lifting paint out of the picture, which I'll show you in a little bit. Sketching, we're not going to do that for Galaxy, we'll do that a little bit later. One thing about watercolors is that they are a transparent medium. That means you can see right through them. So when you're building up paints, go from the lightest to the darkest rather than the other way around. And you also have to have a plan when you're doing this. So you have to think about isolating areas that you want to be white as the paper, because although we do have white in the palette, that's actually gouache, and I like to use it sparingly. And we will use it today for our project. We are doing a galaxy. This is our galaxy. We'll be doing, this is a dry one, but you can see I used white paint for the stars, but this part is the white of the paper that gives it that sort of Milky Way look. So we're going to be using both techniques so you can get a feel for that. So when you're cleaning your brush out, you don't want to mash the brush down into the bottom of the dish. You just want to gently swish it back and forth, and then scrape it on the edge of your little jar or whatever you have, and then you dry it on your paper towel, and then between your finger and thumb you just run your brush through there, and that'll give it a nice point and keep it crisp and nice for you. You don't want to leave your brush soaking in the water, because what will happen is all the hairs of your brush will splay out. Like, it'll have a really bad hair day, and it won't be good to paint with anymore, really. So make sure you're not soaking your brushes in the water as we work. Okay, so let's get started on our galaxy painting. I have divided my sheet of watercolor paper into 4 sections so that I can experiment and not feel too intimidated by that big piece of white paper. So I'm going to just take one and put the rest aside for now. And what I'm going to do is wet down this paper completely on both sides. So the way you can tell if the paper is wet is I have a window right here. I can see a reflection off the paper, and if it's shiny, then it's wet. If it's dull and a matte finish, then you know your paper's dry. So what will happen if the paper is dry is that the paint will absorb differently into that spot. And for this particular technique called wet into wet, we want the paper completely wet. So I'm tilting it back and forth in front of the window to see if I've gotten it wet. But what we don't want is too much water. We want it to be damp, but we don't want it to be soaking. We don't want it to be dripping. So if the water is dripping off here, you've got a little too much, just soak it up with a brush, move it around. We're going to do it on both sides of this paper, because what will happen, as you can see, is the paper starts to curl to the dry side. So if we wet this side down, it'll be easier to work with. And I keep tilting to the window, get those dry spots that will show up because the wet spots are reflective. Turn it around to this other side. Again, I don't want big puddles, but I don't want it dry either. And that's part of it's a learning curve here. So, but you will get a feel for it as we go. So I want you to think of this as a learning experience, not a perfect painting. So I have a little tray here that was on top of a box of salad greens. It works really well. It has a little lip around the edge, and it's plastic, so it's waterproof. That's what I use to put my painting on. But you could use a flat plate or a little tray, whatever you want. Whatever you have will work. Okay, so I'm making sure that I have a nice wet paper. The paper is absorbing the water, so I'm re-wetting it as I go. But again, I find that beginners tend to over soak the paper. So make sure that you're conscious of not over soaking, but you're also conscious of not having dry spots. Now I have a bunch of blues here that I would like to use, and I'm wetting them down, and I'm going to go from lightest to darkest. So I'm going to mix the colors on my paper this time around. Okay, so I'm starting to soak, and I'm getting a feel for how wet my paper is. Is it wet enough? It needs a little bit more, so I'm just going to go in and add water. It's a little drier than I needed. Oh, that's looking better. Okay, and I'm going to leave some white of the paper, because with watercolor you use the white of the paper for the white in most cases, because the white that is in your tray of watercolors it's not actually watercolor, it's a gouache, and it is not transparent. It is opaque, so you can't, well, you can see through it a little bit, but it's not really watercolor. So I use it sparingly. I don't like the look of it that much. You can see me, I'm going in and I'm thinking about a galaxy sky, and I'm leaving a little bit of white Milky Way. Now let's say I got a little bit too much paint right there, and I need to take it out. So I'm going to take my paper towel, a little dry spot, I'm going to wrinkle it up. I'm going to go in, and you see how that pulled it out? Pulled it right out. While it's still wet, you can correct it by pulling out there. But I don't really like my edges. I just wanted to show you how to do that in case you did get too much paint or you didn't like how it looked. I'm going to go back in and add a little more blue paint there. I don't want it quite so starkly white. That particular technique works really well for clouds, but I don't really want it for my galaxy. Okay, could be northern lights rather than galaxy. It's a night sky. So I don't want any hard edges here. And this technique is called wet into wet because the paper's wet and the paint is very wet. It's not a dry paint. You can see that it runs and flows all over the paper, which is a really nice effect here. Now I've got my blue, my very lightest blue in, and if I wanted a little bit more Milky Way, I can clean my brush, dry it a little on the paper towel, and then I can come back in and kind of mop up a bit and keep taking little paint off if I wanted more white. While it's still wet, you can pretty much get most of it up if you want to. So use your brush as a tool to remove if you get too much and you want more of that Milky Way sky look. You can pretty much pull it all the way back to the paper and get white paper if you want that. So those are two ways to remove paint while it's still dry. It's a lot harder to get rid of it once it is dry. Okay, so I think that looks good. I'm going to move on to my next color, which I think is going to be this beautiful dark blue. And I'm mixing it up because these paints are really dry. I'm going to have to scrape the pan a little bit to get enough intensity of pigment into that. And now I'm going to start dropping in this beautiful color. And I need a little bit more water to get it to flow. Something else I can do if I want to move my paint around is tip the paper. You see how that's flowing over the page? Look at that edge. See how it's flowing? So that could help me maybe if I get too much and I want to just see how it flows around, what effects I can make by tilting the page. I'm kind of liking the way that's looking, but not on this side. I don't like that side. It's too straight. I don't want straight lines, and this is a Milky Way, not a straight line kind of thing. That didn't make any sense, did it? I'm going to keep adding this color and letting the paper, by tilting it, do the work for me. But I'm going to try and get rid of those straight lines because I don't think it belongs in a galaxy sky or northern light sky, whatever you're thinking of this as. So you can see I'm kind of leaving the center more of the light blue color and the edges are the darker colors. And that's a little bit of a hard edge, so I'm going to add a little bit more water. Now be conscious of not adding too much water, because if you add too much water, you'll find that your paints are too diluted and you won't get the effect that you're looking for. Okay, so this is the wet into wet technique, and it's something you're going to use frequently in watercolors. It's one of the techniques I use most when I want something flowy, or let's say you wanted something more abstract. This would be a great technique to use to get those kind of looks in your painting. I'm going back in and I'm adding a little more of that lighter blue because it sort of feels faded to me now against that dark purpley blue. And again, I can tilt my paper. If I want it to flow around, that might help me get the look that I want. Crazy about the way that's looking, but remember I can always lift it back out. Ooh, I just broke my brush. I'm too vigorous there, but it's still long enough I can keep going. Okay. Alright, a little bit more that purple color. Really pretty color. Now you might be tempted to stop there, but I tend to think these galaxy paintings look better when they go all the way to black at the very edges. I don't use a lot of black in the center, but around the edges I think it's a very nice touch. Darkening up this purple up a little bit. The intentions of coming back in with a black. I'm going to soften that little edge. That edge is called a bloom. The way it fans out like that, that's a bloom, a watercolor bloom. That can be useful depending on what you're doing. If you want something loose looking, that can be a great technique in watercolor. But if you're doing a tight, realistic piece, that might not be what you want. So it just depends. In this piece, I think it looks great. So this is wet into wet. And I think I want a little more of that blue, that light blue, in here. Starting to get a little dry, so I'm going to come back in. A little more water. You can see my paper is bowing a little bit because the other side has dried a bit more than I'd like. But I'm still working it here, so we're good. Okay. Now if I want to add more colors, maybe I want to add a green that looks like a northern light. Let's see, what color green would I add? Maybe this kind of tealy green is nice. Might add that in here. Just add some clean water on the side, kind of combine the two. Get a nice flow going. I like the way that looks. That flow off the page a bit. Let's see, where else do I want a little bit of that green coming through? And you can use any colors you want. You do not have to use the colors I'm using. If you want to make a pink sky, go for it. The main thing we're trying to learn here is wet into wet. How to use it. It may not look like mine. That's totally fine. You learn something every time you pick up the watercolors and try something new. This is a learning experience. You may learn that you need less water. You may learn that you need more water. Just every time you do it, just try and learn something. That is the point here. Okay, I think this might be a little bit on the white, too white. I'm going to go back in with the blue. I don't want it to be too white because my stars won't show up if it's too white. I definitely want to put the stars in. Okay, I think I'm ready for my black. Ooh, do you see I just sprayed it all over the place like that? Alright, so this is a great opportunity to show you how I would clean up. I'm going to rinse out the brush completely, make sure it has no black on it. I'm going to go back in and I just touch it. And I've almost got the whole thing out. There is a tiny mark there, but mostly I'm able to pull it out. It was a little dry there, that's why I couldn't completely pull it out. These little marks I don't really mind so much. I'm probably going to cover those with the black anyway. Alright, so that's to a point where I feel good about that. I'll try not to splatter this on my painting this time. Okay, and now I'm going to go into just on the edges. I'm going to use this really black paint. You can see that bloom happening, and I can tilt my page a little bit, get it to move into the center a little bit more. Keep tilting, tilt in different directions so the paint will flow where you want it to. You can have it tilted back on itself to have it flow back if you want. Okay, that looks good on that side. Come in here a little bit and around the edges. Right, these edges are a little bit hard, so I'm going to soften those up with a little bit of water. Don't mix the colors in the little trays. We're going to use the palette over here on the side to mix those colors. So every time you go into a pan, you want to go in with a clean brush, because what will happen is that you will contaminate your pans with another color, and I can show you how to clean that out, which is to let's say this blue had another color in it. Let's just put that in there. Let's say that happened. And I would clean my brush out, wipe it down on the paper towel, and then I would go back in and I would scoop it out with a brush and then clean my brush out. And I would keep scooping with a fairly dry brush. You know, it's damp, but it's fairly dry. Keep scooping out until I got back to just the color in the pan. So try not to contaminate your pans. It's nice to have it pure colors, and mix over here on your palette. It is also possible to mix on the paper, which we'll go over in just a little bit. Not too much, because I don't want to dilute them down to the point that they don't have their... And coming in on the edges with this black. It looks a little harsh to me, so I'm going to just soften it with a clean brush that's mostly dry. Just coming in, just basically tapping it. A nice bloom there. Might help it out on this side a little bit with the brush. Get it to blend. And I'm feeling the need for a little more purple. I feel like I mostly covered up the purple, so I'm going to go back in and deepen that purple. Clean my brush, dry it a little bit, so it's just damp. I'm going to touch the edge of this, get that bloom to work into the softer areas. A little purple over here maybe, a little more water. You definitely have to add water as you go, or it starts to get too dry. Oh, it's starting to look like a galaxy. A little more purple here. A little more water to get the flow going. I'm going to tilt my page to see if I can get a nice bloom right along the edges, and here it's blooming very nicely. So that bloom, if you want to control it, your paper should be damp but not super wet, and the paint that's on the brush should be super wet. So you can see, I'm going to bring it a little closer so you can see that bloom right there. I think that's a really nice technique for the galaxy sky. The paint is very saturated with color and very wet, and it will bloom. And I'm tilting a little bit, and that gives you some control over where your paint's going, but not too much so it doesn't look too even or anything. It looks natural. You see that bloom? It's got a nice one right there. I'll soften that black up a little bit right there. Got a nice bloom going on there. More bloom. Oh, I'm liking the way this is looking. Coming on nice. Mix it a bit with the black. Alright, I think that looks pretty good. I like the way it looks. I like the way the bloom is coming in here. Got a nice mixture of colors. Soften that maybe just a tad. Ooh, I got a lot of water on there. So if I get too much water, I clean my brush, I dry it, and then I just tap with the brush and pick it up a little bit. There, that's better. There we go. I think that looks good. Now we're going to let this dry, and then we'll move on to the next step. And it's a little bit warped, so I'm just bending the paper the other way It's not completely dry, but dry enough so that I can go back in and start painting. I'm taking the smaller brush. Use this little bit cleaner water here. Wet my brush. I'm gonna make sure my water is pretty clean, because if I put this water, if I use this water to get my paint, it would definitely tinge it green. So there are two ways that you can get this white paint, which will be stars, onto your picture. I'm going to get myself a little board here to put this on so I don't get it all over my nice clean board. So I'm going to do a little spattering here, which is kind of fun but a little messy, so you might want to put down newspaper underneath your painting. And I'm just going to load my brush. That means that it's full of wet paint. And I'm going to put my hand down like this, and I'm just going to tap, 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 tap the side of my hand, and it will make little stars. Now you can see that some of them are just too big. So I'm going to come in with a clean brush, pretty dry, and I'm just going to touch that and kind of pull it up, because it's not a star, it's just a clump, which can happen. It's okay, we'll fix it. So anything you feel just got too big, just with a clean brush, keep drying that brush as you pull things out, and it won't come completely out, but if you just soften a little, it'll look better. It'll look more like part of your galaxy. Okay, so I've got that in. I'm going to go back and use my smaller brush. I'm going to keep it pretty dry because I really want quite a bit of pigment on this brush, and not too watery wet. I want it pretty thick, like cream thick. And I'm just going to touch here and there. You can see how that's pretty dark, or dark, that's very light. So it's an opaque white that is gouache, which is different than watercolors. And for this particular application, it works very well to put in stars in your night sky. So I keep loading my brush with lots and lots of pigment, lots of color, and not too much water. And you want lots of stars. If you just put in a few, it'll look kind of funny. So make sure you put in lots of stars. And you can make some bigger, some smaller. Try not to line them up too much. I think this is looking good. I'm liking all my stars. There's a little cluster of them over here. Maybe you could go back and put in actual constellations. That might be a fun thing to do. Alright, so there are your stars. Okay, so now I have set up a little still life of lemons, and I've got my sketches done. If you want to pause the video here and sketch for yourself, that would be a great idea. I'm going to start erasing some of my lines, some of my sketching lines, and softening up some of the lines I feel are a little dark. I don't want them to show through the painting quite that much. A little bit of pencil mark is okay. It depends on what you want your painting to look like. I tend to like the pencil mark to be lighter. So I'm going to just softly, not erase it all together, but just kind of soften those lines up a bit. Dust that off. Sometimes I have a big brush I use to brush those off with, those little eraser crumbles. Okay, so now we're ready to go. So what you want to think about when you're painting these is you want to have a plan before you go in, because watercolors are translucent and it is very hard to cover up dark colors once you've got them down. So it's much easier to start with a plan, like where is the lightest area of the painting. So I'm going to say right here is probably the lightest, and right here the highlights, okay? And then it works out to the edge, and this right in here is the shadow is probably the darkest edge, and the leaves value wires are the darkest. But I want to make sure that the highlights, it's not quite white here, but the lightest value is right there. And we're talking about value, we're talking about how dark or light a color is perceived. So with a watercolor, you want to use the white of the paper if you can. Sometimes people use the gouache that's in the set, and we will when we finish up the galaxy paintings. I'll show you what that looks like, but right now we're going to try and use the white of the paper to create these lemons. So we're using a wet into wet technique again. Make sure my brush is clean. I'm using the little bit larger brush that came in your art bag. Any kind of number 6 kind of brush will work if you didn't get the art bag. So as I'm painting, I'm going to try and avoid this little area right here as I paint. So I'm going to show you, I've wet down my colors. I think this matches this very well. Okay, so I'm going to use that color. I'm going to go in and wet down my lemon. So we're going to try the wet into wet technique again. So we've got that wet, not soaking, not puddling, but definitely damp, okay? And if you are wondering whether you got the whole thing wet or not, you can turn it and you'll see a little bit of shine, a little bit of reflection, and if you've missed somewhere, it will be matte like the rest of the paper. So I can see that I've got my whole area wet. Now I'm going to go in with this little bit of lemon, and I'm going to thin it out on my palette here. It's a little saturated. Those paints have been soaking just a little bit, and I'm going to thin it down. And now I want to isolate that area that I want to highlight. There's a really lovely texture to this lemon that we can mimic by kind of stippling the brush up and down. Dot, 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 dot. And we see how that area is not completely white, but it is very light. But just for the purposes of demonstration, I'm going to let a little bit of white paper show through so you can see how it would be just to leave the white of the paper. And then I'm going to go over the whole thing with that yellow color. And I can see there's a little bit of highlight right there reflected off of our surface. So I'm going to watch to keep that a little bit lighter too. I'm going to go back in and get a little bit stronger pigment, a little more paint, a little less water. And I'm going to go into those areas that are a little bit more yellow. I'd say everywhere except right there, right where the highlight is. That is a really lovely yellow. I can see there's a little bit of, I want a little bit of orange, yeah, I think I want a little orange, but very little. I just want a tiny little bit of orange. I'm going to mix up over here in my palette just a tinge of orange. I'm going to go in right around this area with it, right along that edge. Really lovely. Stipple it in. See all those little marks on the lemon? We can kind of recreate that by just dabbing our brush on it. Okay, and you can start to see that highlight shape, and you can start to see a little bit of shadow shape. I'm going to mix up a little bit more of that yellow and a little bit more of that orange. Peachy, it's kind of a peachy orange. Okay, now I'm going to make sure I'm observing my lemon. I can get in here and stipple. Get that little bit of texture that the lemon has. Little dimples on the surface. You can capture that with the watercolor very nicely. And it's a little bit lighter toward this end, so I'm gonna, before that completely dries, I'm gonna just stipple with my brush, a clean brush, I cleaned it out in my water, dried it on the paper towel, and I'm gonna come back in and just dab, 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 just make sure that that doesn't become a hard edge right there. I'm cleaning my brush again, drying it off a bit, and just dabbing it to make sure that I don't get a strange mark right there. Going for a little bit more realism here than our galaxy. And the lemon's starting to take a little bit of shape. And I'm wanting to go in a bit darker. You can see the value there is a bit darker. So I think I'm going to go in with a little bit of this brown. I'm going to mix it into that orange we had used before. Okay, and I'm going to come in right at the end here. Right where that little point starts. Maybe trace around the very edge of it. You can see that there's a shadow right there. Coming up this side. And we can stipple to get the little effect of the dimples on the lemon. Alright, now I want to come in and go even just a little bit darker. Let's see, what colors do I want? A little bit more of this brown color. And come in and right on that side. Get my brush quite loaded enough. And I'm just going to stipple it in a bit. Need to load my brush up a bit more. And right here as well, going across the top of the lemon in a little arc. There's a shadow there. Coming around this side. Really be looking at that lemon and the way the light is hitting it. Should be observing the lemon as much as you are painting. Constantly looking back at your reference. See what's going on there. Now I've made a little mark here that I'm not crazy about, so I'm cleaning my brush. I'm going to go back in and kind of just clean it up a bit. It won't be perfect, but it'll stick out a little bit less. Okay, so I've got that cleaned up. I think I'm going to let that dry and I'm going to move on to my next lemon. So with this lemon, I'm observing the highlight is mostly right there. And this lemon, as you notice, is a little bit cooler than this lemon. This lemon is really a sunny yellow and it's warm, and this is a more of a green yellow and it's a little softer. We actually have the perfect green. See, this green right here is really kind of perfect for this lemon. That's a slightly different color. And this is sort of a classic lemon yellow right next to it. Those two colors are perfect for this lemon. So I'm going to start again by wetting the lemon down. Not too much now, because you don't want puddles. You just want it to be damp so you have control. When you start to puddle the water, you're going to lose control a bit, which can be wonderful as well, depending on how loose or how detailed you want your painting to be. Okay, and then I'm going to come in with that really cool sort of greenish tinged yellow, and I'm going to be really aware of this area right here that's white, and I'm going to go around that first. It's not entirely white, but for the purposes of showing you how to preserve your paper, I'm going to go around the outside of that space that is the lightest on this lemon, and I'm going to leave that area white right in there. I'm going to fill in the rest of the lemon with this color, preserving that little highlight area with the white paper. I'm going to clean my brush, dry it off a bit, and then I'm going to go stipple the edge between that wash I just put in and the white of the paper just to soften it. This is not a hard edge highlight in here. This is very soft. So we can soften what we have on the paper by just dabbing with our brush, a pretty dry brush. Look how soft that is now. Okay, so let's go back in with that little bit deeper lemony yellow. Make sure you're observing where it would go on here. It's around, it's darker here, it's a really green here, and then the shadow comes around this side. And just observe and then paint what I see. Anybody to worry about it being perfect this time around. This is a learning experience, and just by doing it you're going to get better. So just keep going, even if it's not perfect and it's not working out the way you want it. Maybe it's a complete disaster. Don't worry about it. You have learned something, and that is the whole point. Next time when you go back to do it, you'll be better at it. You'll know a little something, and you'll know how to control the paint a little bit better. So just keep trying, keep going. This is, you know, maybe you can't do it yet, but emphasis on yet, because the more you do it, the more you'll get it. And you'll probably impress yourself as time goes by about how good you end up getting if you keep going. Just keep going. Now I've gotten it a little too cool, I think. I'm going to stipple in some little details there. And I'm going to clean my brush and dry it and go back in and pull a little bit of that paint out. I feel like I got it a little too dark and a little too stark. I want it to blend really nicely. Alright, and then I'm going to clean my brush and get some of the warm sunny yellow and mix it with some of that the greenish yellow. And go back in on this side right here, warm up that section a bit. Over here as well. I'm going to clean my brush and I'm going to dry it just a bit, and then I'm going to stipple that edge between the two different colors just to soften it. Give it a more realistic blend. I think that looks pretty good. And now you can see that this part right here is a little bit green. I'm going to use this green, but it definitely needs to be blended. It does not match well. It needs to be mellowed out. I think I might try that one. Sometimes it's really nice to have a piece of paper just to try it. It's just a little scrap. I just put a little bit on, and I can see that I've gone too light, that I need a bit more green. You can try it again, a little scrap piece of paper, and I think that looks good. So now I can go in, observing where that green is on the lemon, just touch it onto there. Maybe it's bled out a little bit, so I'll clean it up a tad. I feel like it needs a little bit more. Oh, I think I used the wrong green there. This green. And I'll go back in and just touch it. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it there, let it dry, and I'm going to look at a leaf. Lots of little leaves here to look at, and they don't have any really distinct highlights. There are definitely areas that are lighter than other areas, but I think I'm going to go in with a very light wash to cover the whole thing. I'm going to make it a little bit lighter than I think it should be. let's see, what green would I want to use? I think I'm going to use this green, but not straight, certainly. I'm going to thin it way down, and I think I'm going to add a little bit of this green right here. Not entirely happy with that green. What do I need? Maybe some of this? No, that wasn't it. Sometimes I don't get the right color the first time around. That's okay. I'll just clean one of these little palette trays and I start again. So I've got that. Let's see, what do I want? Maybe I'll try a little bit of this blue because I'm sure you all know that yellow and blue make green. Is that the color I wanted? I'm gonna add some of this yellow. I'm kind of liking that for the first glaze. That will be the first translucent coat I put down as a glaze. And when I go over the top of it with another color, that makes it a glaze. So I'm doing this very lightly at first, very pale color, because that is the palest color I'm seeing in the leaves. So I'm starting with that very light color. Now I could do this another way because I did dry paper with a wet wash. Now I could do a wet onto wet technique, which I wet the paper first, not too much because this is a small area. I might want to pull some of that water back out. I don't want it to be too out of control. All right, now let's see what happens when I drop the water. Okay, it's pretty controlled. It's a little too dark though. So I'm just going to have water on my brush as I pull that out. And so that's another way of doing it. Do the wet on wet, or you can do a very washy, dilute your paint way down and just go in on dry paper. I think I like the way that looks better. And then I could flood areas too after I've gotten it completely wet. I'm going to do this little leaf over here. Fill that in. Okay, so I have my leaves, my first glaze on those, and I'm going to try and see if I can get the right color for the darker portion of the leaves. I'm going to try, this is a very blue-green, which not exactly what I want. So I think I'm going to add a little yellow. See what happens when I do that. It's too light still. Let's see. Might want to just add a little bit of black, just a tiny bit, because the black is powerful. See what happens there. Oh, I'm kind of liking that. Okay, so so I'm going to go back in and put those darker values onto my leaves. Clean my brush and soften that edge, just dabbing at that darker color, and that softens it right up, gives you a nice blend. And I'm going to try it on my other leaves. It's nice to have a good sized pool of whatever color you're using, so you don't have to keep stopping and mixing that up. So make sure you mix enough for yourself that you're not having to stop in the middle of what you're doing and remix the color. And you might not get the color exactly the way you had it before, which can be kind of annoying. So better to mix up a little bit too much than a little bit too little. Okay, and I'm dabbing those edges, just softening it. Softening that dark into the light. I'm observing the leaves as I go, making sure I'm getting the idea of it down. Okay. There you are. Lemons and leaves. We could keep going back and adding more detail. Might soften those a bit. I don't mind so much. If it's hard, I just think maybe it'll look a little bit better for these slightly softer. Make sure your brush is clean and slightly dry, and that will get you that softer edge that you're after. Okay. So that's it for today's lesson. I hope you enjoyed making these lemons and galaxy sky watercolor paintings, wet into wet. Go back and keep working on them. Practice this week. Keep trying that wet into wet technique. Maybe go outside even and try painting there, although that can be a little problematic. Just make sure you tape down your paper or keep it on the sheet that it came on, the pad that it came on. That'll work well too. You can come back in and put more details in on these lemons. They will look great with a little bit more detail in them. And have fun. Have a great week, and I'll see you next Friday. Bye-bye.